The first transmission arrived on a Tuesday, crackling through the quantum relay stations with the cold authority of a death sentence. Commander Evelyn Cora stared at the holographic display floating above her desk aboard the UES. Defiance, Edge, watching the alien script translate itself into sterile, bureaucratic English. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to look away from the words that had just condemned 7 billion souls. Attention, primitive species designated human. The message read, "Your presence in Sector 77 Gamma constitutes territorial violation of the Next Harry Dominion. You have 72 standard cycles to evacuate all colonies, installations, and vessels from the following systems." The list scrolled endlessly: New Geneva, Kepler's Promise, Haven's Rest. Dozens of worlds where families had built lives among alien stars. Commander, Lieutenant Nax Delacroix's voice cut through her thoughts. The young officer stood in the doorway of her ready room, his dark face pale beneath the harsh ship lighting. "Admiral Voss is requesting immediate conference with all sector commanders." Korath nodded, rising from her chair with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more years in variable gravity than planetary standard. At 53, she was old enough to remember when humanity's greatest enemy had been itself, when the idea of aliens was relegated to entertainment feeds and scientific speculation. Now, 12 years after first contact with the peaceful Altarian collective, they faced their first true interstellar threat. The conference room filled with holographic projections of her fellow commanders: Marcus Rothwell from the Iron Conscience, Yuki Tanaka commanding the Sovereign's Wrath, and 8 others scattered across the frontier. Admiral Helena Voss materialized at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had somehow survived 3 decades of military service. "I assume you've all reviewed the Next Harry ultimatum," Voss began without preamble. "Intelligence suggests they're not bluffing. Long-range sensors have detected a fleet massing at the edge of the Void Nebula. At least 300 vessels, including what appears to be a Dreadnought-class flagship." Commander Rothwell leaned forward, his scarred face grim. "What do we know about their capabilities?" "Very little," Voss admitted. "The Altarians describe them as aggressive collectors, a species that expands by claiming territory and absorbing useful technologies from conquered civilizations. They've been expanding toward our sector for the past 50 years, leaving nothing but stripped worlds and silence behind them. And our response," this from Tanaka, her voice carrying the controlled tension of a coiled spring. Voss's smile was winter cold. "The Colonial Council has issued a counter-statement. We're not evacuating, we're not abandoning our people, and we're certainly not bowing to threats from species that think might makes right." The room fell silent except for the subtle hum of the ship's systems. Korath felt something ancient and primal stirring in her chest, the same feeling her ancestors must have experienced when faced with existential threats. Humanity had clawed its way up from the mud of a hostile world, survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended them. They learned to split atoms and bend space-time, to build homes among the stars themselves. "What are our orders, Admiral?" Korath asked. "We hold the line," Voss replied. "Every ship, every station, every rock with a human settlement. The Next Harry want to test humanity's resolve. They're about to learn why we're the species that turned a death world into paradise, then left paradise behind to claim the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving Korath alone with her thoughts and the weight of command. Outside her viewport, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the brief sparks of consciousness that flickered between them. But those sparks had learned to burn brighter than suns when threatened. She touched her calm badge. "All hands, this is the commander. Prepare for combat operations. We have visitors coming, and they seem to have forgotten their manners. Let's remind them why you don't pick fights with humans." The 72-hour countdown had begun. In the vast silence of space, war drums were beginning to beat. The Next Harry arrived ahead of schedule. Korath was reviewing defensive positions when the proximity alarm screamed. Through the Defiance Edge, she sprinted to the bridge, her boots ringing against metal decking as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated under the strain of emergency acceleration. "Report," she barked, sliding into the command chair. Next Harry fleet dropping out of hyperspace, called out Navigator Ellis Cromwell, his fingers dancing across the tactical display. 6 to 7 vessels, led by what looked like their dreadnought. They're moving into attack formation. The main screen flickered to life, revealing humanity's first clear look at their enemies. The Next Harry ships were organic nightmares black, chitinous hulls that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, bristling with weapon emplacements that looked like predatory mouths. The dreadnought was a kilometer-long monstrosity that resembled some deep-sea leviathan, crossed with a cathedral of bone. "They're beautiful," whispered Tactical Officer Zara Okafor, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, no, you're right," Cora said grimly. "Predators usually are." "Incoming transmission." "Yes, ma'am." Audio and visual. The screen shifted to show the interior of the alien flagship. The next Harry commander was 7 feet of insectoid horror, 6 arms ending in razor talons, compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds, mandibles that clicked with barely contained aggression. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of breaking glass filtered through a synthesizer. "I am War Primary Krexithic of the next Harry Dominion. Your species has failed to comply with evacuation orders. We will now demonstrate the consequences of defiance." "This is Commander Evelyn Korath of the United Earth Space Force," she replied, rising from her chair. "Your ultimatum was rejected by the Colonial Council. These systems are under human protection, and we will defend them." The alien's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement. "Defend? Your primitive vessels number fewer than 30. We are 6 to 7. Your technology is inferior. Your species is weak, soft, ruled by emotion rather than logic. You will be absorbed or destroyed." "There's a third option," Cora said quietly. "You could leave right now. Jump back to whatever corner of hell spawned you and forget you ever heard of humanity." Krexithic's compound eyes reflected the bridge lighting like oil on water. "You amuse us. Soft thing, we shall preserve some of your species for study. Perhaps you will teach us to laugh before you teach us to scream." The connection severed. Cora felt the familiar combat calm settling over her, the same ice-cold focus that had carried her through the Titan Rebellion and the Merchant Wars. Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their fear transformed into deadly purpose. "All ships, this is Korath. Execute pattern Delta 7. They want to see what human technology can do. Show them." The human fleet dispersed like a school of fish sensing a shark, their formation becoming chaos beautiful, calculated chaos. The Defiance Edge led the charge, its fusion drives painting space with nuclear fire as it arrowed toward the next Harry line. The battle began with light lances of coherent energy that turned the void into a deadly aurora. Next Harry bioweapons spat streams of corrosive plasma, while human kinetic cannons replied with depleted uranium slugs, moving at significant fractions of light speed. The first casualties came quickly. The corvette's stalwart vanished in a bloom of superheated gas, while the next Harry frigate split in half as a railgun round punched through its organic armor. "They're adapting," Okafor reported, her voice tight with concentration. "Their hull plating is becoming more reflective. Our lasers are losing efficiency." "Then we stop using lasers," Korath replied. "Cromwell, plot an intercept course for their flagship. All power to forward shields. Okafor, prepare. The Automata warheads, Mum, will have to get within point defense range." "I'm counting on it." The Defiance edged up toward the next Harry dreadnought like a missile seeking its target. Space around them became a hurricane of death plasma bolts, particle beams, and swarms of biomechanical interceptors that moved like angry wasps. Human point defense systems chattered constantly, filling space with tungsten flechettes and laser bursts. They had lost the destroyer Retribution when the next Harry heavy cruiser rammed it. Amidships, both vessels dying in a brilliant fusion explosion. The frigate dancing blade simply disappeared, swallowed by some weapon that folded space around it into impossible geometries. But humanity kept coming. They always kept coming. The first blood belonged to Commander Tanaka, whose sovereign's wrath managed to cripple the next Harry battlecruiser with a barrage of nuclear-tipped torpedoes. The alien vessel listed, its bioluminescent veins flickering like a dying heart. Before secondary explosions tore it apart from within, Korath watched the tactical display, counting casualties on both sides. 12 human ships destroyed or crippled. 15 next Harry vessels eliminated. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The war had begun, and already the mathematics of extinction were writing themselves across the stars. The siege of Haven's Rest lasted 18 days. Commander Korath stood in the observation deck of Firebase Alpha, watching mushroom clouds bloom across the planet's southern continent like deadly flowers. The next Harry had bypassed the orbital defenses 3 days ago, landing ground forces that carved through human settlements with methodical precision. Latest casualty reports, Commander, Lieutenant Delacroix's voice was hoarse from exhaustion and grief. The young officer had aged a decade in less than 3 weeks, his face bearing the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd seen too much death. Cora took the data pad without looking at it. She already knew the numbers would be obscene. 2 million civilians evacuated, 400,000 confirmed dead, another 600,000 missing, presumed dead. The mathematics of genocide written in sterile military briefings. Any word from the relief fleet? Admiral Voss estimates another 48 hours. The NexHFY are contesting every jump point between here and Kepler's promise. Through the reinforced transparistelle, Cora could see the enemy's latest biological horror, massive, spider-like constructs the size of city blocks, each one capable of spawning thousands of smaller warrior forms. They moved across Heaven's Rest like a plague, converting everything they touched into more of themselves. The door hissed open behind her. Commander Cora. The voice belonged to Dr. Amara Thorne, the xenobiologist who'd been studying NexHFY specimens since the first encounter. The woman looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her red hair wild, her lab coat stained with substances Cora preferred not to identify. Doctor, please tell me you have good news. Thorne's laugh was bitter. Good news? We're fighting a species that treats warfare like gardening. They don't just conquer planets, they convert them. Every dead human becomes raw material for their bioconstructs. Every captured piece of technology gets analyzed, reverse-engineered, and improved upon. We're not just losing this war, Commander. We're making them stronger with every battle. Cora finally looked at the casualty report. The numbers blurred together, companies wiped out, entire regiments missing in action. The 15th Colonial Marines had lost 80% of their strength defending New Sarajevo. The 203rd Armored Division had been completely overrun at the Meridian Gap. There's something else. Thorne continued. I've been analyzing their tactical patterns. The NexHFY aren't just trying to eliminate us, they're studying us. Every engagement, every defensive position we take, every weapon we deploy, they're learning from it. Learning what? How to fight humans more efficiently. Their casualty rates have been decreasing with each battle while ours, she gestured helplessly at the data pad. An explosion lit the horizon, bright enough to cast shadows through the firebase's armored windows. Another human stronghold had fallen. Another piece of Heaven's Rest had been digested by the alien war machine. Cora's combats chirped. Commander, this is Colonel Martinez at Firebase Beta. We have a situation. The tactical hologram materialized in the center of the observation deck, showing a 3-dimensional map of the continent. Red markers indicated NexHFY positions there. Were far too many of them, spreading like infection across areas that had been green just hours before. They've broken through at Sector 7 and 12, Martinez reported, his image flickering with interference. My best estimate is we have maybe 6 hours before they reach the civilian evacuation zones. What about the nuclear option? Delacroix asked quietly. Cora considered it. The plan had been discussed, debated, and reluctantly approved by High Command. If conventional forces failed, they would detonate a series of antimatter charges in the planet's crust, turning Heaven's Rest into an expanding cloud of radioactive debris. Better a dead world than a NexHFY breeding ground. Not yet, she said finally. We still have people down there, Mum. With respect, Martinez interrupted. We might not have people down there much longer. These things, they don't just kill, they use what they kill. Every human they capture makes them stronger. Dr. Thorne nodded grimly. The Colonel's right. I've seen the bioconstructs they create from human genetic material. They retain our problem-solving abilities, our tactical thinking, but without conscience or mercy. They're building an army of human intelligence married to alien ruthlessness. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Cora thought of her own daughter, Sarah, safe in the Sol system, but old enough to understand what was happening on the frontier. What kind of galaxy would she inherit if humanity lost this war? There might be another option, Thorne said suddenly. The analysis of their bioships revealed something interesting. They're not just organic, they're symbiotically organic. The NexHFY don't build their ships. They grow them in partnership with some kind of engineered organism, a pilot species, meaning they might have the same weakness we do. Cut off the head, and the body dies. If we could identify and eliminate their command structure, another explosion, closer this time. The firebase's defensive systems engaged automatically, filling the air with the chatter of automated weapons. Somewhere in the distance, humans, We're dying while aliens learn from their sacrifice. Korath made her decision. Give me a direct line to Admiral Voss. It's time to stop playing defense. She looked out at the burning world below, where the species were locked in a death spiral that could only end with one of them extinct. The next Harry had brought war to humanity's door. It was time to return the favor. The first strike came at 0347 hours, ship time. Admiral Helena Voss materialized on the bridge of the Defiant's edge as a full-size hologram, her image flickering with quantum interference from the battle raging around Earth's outer colonies. Behind her, stars wheeled in patterns Korath didn't recognize. The Admiral was calling from somewhere deep in Next Harry space. Operation Prometheus is a go, Voss said without preamble. Intelligence has located their primary hive world. Designation: Korthvagel. 3 systems core to the Next Harry frontier. Dr. Thorne's analysis was correct to eliminate their queen mind, and the entire war machine collapses. Korath felt her pulse quicken. What about Haven's Rest? You hold the line for 72 more hours. That's how long we need to reach Korthvagel and deploy the bioweapon. Voss's expression was granite. After that, it won't matter. Either we succeed and end this war, or we fail and there won't be a human left alive to care about. One burned world. The connection ended, leaving Korath alone with the weight of the next 3 days. 72 hours to keep the Next Harry focused on Haven's Rest. While humanity's most desperate gambit played out in the dark between stars, she turned to her. Brid, crew, you are the Admiral. We buy them time, whatever the cost. Delacroix, signal all remaining ground forces. Pattern Omega, every firebase, every defensive position, every hole in the ground with a human and a gun. We make them bleed for every meter. The response was immediate and devastating. Human forces that had been conducting fighting withdrawals for weeks suddenly turned and attacked with the fury of cornered animals. The 15th Colonial Marines, reduced to barely company strength, launched a suicidal assault on the Next Harry biofoundry that had been converting civilian prisoners into war constructs. They didn't succeed in destroying it, but they killed enough aliens to buy the evacuation shuttles another 6 hours. The cost was horrific. Colonel Martinez's Firebase Beta was overrun on the second day. Korath watched through satellite feeds as the base's final transmission cut to static. Martinez himself standing in the command bunker, a dead man's switch in his hand, waiting until the last possible moment before detonating the facility's antimatter reactor. The explosion vaporized 3 square kilometers of Next Harry bioforms and carved a crater visible from orbit. They're adapting faster now, Dr. Thorne reported from her mobile lab aboard the evacuation ship Sanctuary. Each major engagement, they learned something new. They've started using human bodies as pilots for their biomechs, our own people, surgically integrated into their war machines, retaining enough memory to know our tactics. The 3rd day brought the worst horror yet. The Next Harry deployed what intelligence designated as a memory harvest, a floating bioconstruct, the size of a cathedral that fed on neural tissue. It descended on the ruins of New Sarajevo, where human survivors had been hiding in the underground transit system. The screams that emerged from the city weren't just death cries. They were the sound of human consciousness being systematically consumed and cataloged. Commander, Lieutenant Cromwell's voice was barely a whisper. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in orbit. It's God in heaven. It's massive. The tactical display showed something that defied comprehension. A Next Harry ship the size of a small moon, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. As they watched, smaller vessels began budding from its surface like fruit from a tree. That's their queen ship, Dr. Thorne said, her voice filled with sick fascination. The mobile hive mind that coordinates their entire species. If it's here, then she didn't need to finish. If the queen ship was at Haven's Rest, then Admiral Voss's strike force was attacking an empty nest. Operation Prometheus had failed before it began. Korath closed her eyes, feeling the weight of defeat settle around her like a shroud. In 18 hours, the Next Harry would begin the final harvest. Every human on Haven's Rest would be converted into biological components for their war machine. The planet itself would be strip-mined, its resources used to build the ships that would carry death to every human world in the galaxy. Unless, Dr. Thorne, you said the Queen ship is their command nexus. What happens if we destroy it? Commander, that thing masses more than our entire fleet. Its defensive systems. What happens if we destroy it? Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Theoretically, Complete neural collapse across their entire species, every next hairy bioform, every ship, every weapon system. They'd all cease functioning simultaneously. But Commander, the only way to guarantee destruction would be to detonate our antimatter charges at point-blank range. And nothing in our fleet has the armor to survive. The Defiance Edge does, Cora said quietly. One ship, one chance. We rammed that thing with every warhead in our magazine. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of weapons fire from the planet below. Every officer present understood what she was proposing: a suicide run against an enemy vessel that outmassed them by orders of magnitude. Ma'am, Delacroix said carefully, the odds of success don't matter. Cora finished. The only thing that matters is that someone has to try, and we're the ones here. She thought of her daughter again, somewhere in the Sol system, probably, watching the news feeds that painted humanity's first interstellar war in sanitized statistics and patriotic rhetoric. Sarah would never know her mother's last thoughts, never understand that in the final moment, Commander Evelyn Korth wasn't thinking about duty or species survival or the grand sweep of galactic history. She was thinking about a little girl who deserved to grow up in a universe where humans could build homes among the stars without having to kill gods to keep them. All hands. This is the Commander, she announced shipwide. We're going to try something that's never been done before. We're going to kill a queen. The Defiance Edge died fighting. Commander Korth watched her ship's superstructure buckle under the next Harry Queen ship's defensive fire, entire sections venting atmosphere and crew into the cold vacuum of space. The bridge shook with each impact, sparks cascading from overloaded systems as Lieutenant Delacroix fought to keep their weapons online. Forward shields at 15%. Navigator Cromwell reported, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. Port engine offline. We're losing artificial gravity on decks 7 through 12. Through the main view screen, the next Harry Queen ship filled their vision like a nightmare given flesh. The thing was beautiful in the way that cancer was beautiful, an organic cathedral of bone and sinew stretching across kilometers of space. Its surface crawling with defensive bioturrets that spat streams of corrosive plasma. Smaller craft swarmed around it like antibodies protecting a diseased heart. Distance to target, Korth asked, her hands locked on the armrests of her command chair. 1,400 kilometers and closing. At current velocity, will impact in 4 to 7 seconds. Too long. The Queen ship's defenses were already adapting, its bioturrets shifting to track their approach vector. Korth could see the patterns forming a killing field, designed specifically to stop one desperate human ship from completing its mission. The first salvo took out their starboard torpedo bay, the explosion echoing through the ship's superstructure like a death bell. The second punched through their primary armor and vaporized the entire communications array. By the third salvo, the Defiance Edge was more holes than whole, held together by emergency bulkheads and the stubborn refusal of her crew to die quietly. Ma'am, Tactical Officer Okafor's voice cracked with strain. I'm reading massive energy buildup from the Queen ship's primary weapon. Whatever it's charging, it's going to the Queen ship's mouth open. That was the only way Korth could describe it. The front section of the organic Leviathan split apart like a flower, revealing row upon row of biomechanical teeth, each one the size of a city block. Energy crackled between them, building to a discharge that would vaporize the Defiance Edge and everything aboard her. Emergency power to forward shields, Korth ordered. All hands, brace for the Queen ship scream tore through space itself. It wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was the psychic death cry of a creature that had lived for millennia, transmitted through quantum fields and given form by biomechanical amplifiers. The sound bypassed their hull entirely, striking directly at the human nervous system. Across the ship, crew members collapsed as their minds tried to process something fundamentally alien and hostile. Korth felt her consciousness fragmenting, memories of her daughter mixing with visions of organic Carters stretching into infinity. She bit down on her tongue hard enough to draw blood, using pain to anchor herself in reality. Distance, she gasped. 800 kilometers, Cromwell whispered, his hands shaking as he fought to read the instruments. 31 seconds to impact, to slow. They were losing too much speed to defensive fire, bleeding velocity with every hit. At this rate, they'd be dead before they got close enough for their antimatter charges to guarantee the Queen ship's destruction. That's when the rest of humanity's fleet arrived. Commander Rothwell's iron conscience dropped out of hyperspace first. its hull scarred from a dozen battles, but its weapons still firing. Behind it came the battered remnants of the Sol Defense Force. 17 ships that should have been protecting Earth's orbital stations, now racing to die alongside their comrades at the edge of nowhere. All ships. This is Rothwell. The scarred commander's voice crackled through the calm. Form up on the Defiance edge. We're making a hole. The human fleet scattered into attack formation, their combined firepower focusing on the Queen ships. Defensive perimeter. Nuclear warheads detonated against organic armor, carving craters in the alien vessel's hide. Kinetic rounds punched through bioturrets, spilling ichor into the void. For a moment, just a moment, the Queen ship's defensive fire wavered. The Iron Conscience paid for that moment with her life. A concentrated barrage from the Queen ship's secondary weapons tore the destroyer apart, her fusion reactor detonating in a miniature star that lit up the darkness. Commander Rothwell's final transmission was a defiant curse that would have made his grandmother proud. 600 kilometers, Cromwell reported, tears streaming down his face. 23 seconds, the frigate's stalwart's revenge rammed a cluster of next-Harry interceptors, clearing the path for the cruiser Humanity's Resolve. The cruiser lasted long enough to deliver a full salvo of antimatter torpedoes before a biomechanical parasite the size of a subway car punched through her bridge. Captain Singh's last order was to maintain course and speed, even as alien organisms began consuming his ship from within. For 100 kilometers, 15 seconds, the corvette Dancing Star died in silence, her entire crew already dead from Queen ship's psychic assault. The destroyer Valiant lasted longer, her captain manually firing her weapons even as organic tendrils invaded her bridge. One by one, Humanity's ships fell, each death buying precious seconds for the Defiance edge to complete her run. 200 kilometers, 8 seconds. Korath could see individual details on the Queen ship's hull, now biomechanical structures that defied description, organic weapon ports that tracked their approach with predatory intelligence. The thing was wounded, bleeding luminescent fluid from dozens of impact craters, but it was still very much alive. Ma'am, Delacroix said quietly, it's been an honor. Likewise, Lieutenant. The Queen ship's main weapon fired one last time, a concentrated beam of energy that carved through space like the wrath of an angry god. It struck the Defiance edge amidships, vaporizing everything from the engine room to the secondary hull. What remained was barely a ship, just a command section, a handful of surviving crew, and enough antimatter to crack a moon. 100 kilometers, 3 seconds, Korath reached for the detonation switch, her hand steady despite everything she'd witnessed round her. The bridge crew worked with mechanical precision, their duty more important than their terror. For Earth, she whispered. The Defiance edge struck the Queen ship at 17% of light speed, her antimatter warheads detonating on contact. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, a brief, brilliant star that burned away the darkness between worlds. When the light faded, both ships were gone. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any weapon. Dr. Amara Thorne stood in the observation deck of the evacuation ship Sanctuary, watching the debris field that had once been the Queen ship spiral through space like scattered diamonds. Her instruments detected no life signs, no energy signatures, no indication that the massive organic vessel had ever existed beyond the twisted metal and flash-frozen biological matter painting the void. Is it over? Lieutenant Commander Park asked from behind her. The ranking naval officer aboard the Sanctuary was too young to be making decisions about the fate of 3 million refugees packed into the ship's holds. Thorne didn't answer. Immediately, her scanners were detecting something else, something that made her blood run cold. Across Haven's rest surface, the next hairy bioforms had stopped moving. Not destroyed, not retreating, just stopped. Massive spider constructs stood frozen mid-stride. Warrior forms that had been charging human positions were locked in place like statues. Even the floating harvesters hung motionless in the atmosphere. Dr. Thorne, Park pressed. I don't know, she admitted. The Queen ship's destruction should have caused immediate neural collapse across their entire species. But I'm reading residual bioelectrical activity from the ground forces, low level, but definitely present. As if summoned by her words, the next Harry began to move again, but they moved wrong. Through the Sanctuary's powerful telescopes, Thorne watched alien warriors stumble through the ruins of human settlements like drunks trying to navigate in the dark. Their movements were erratic, purposeless. Biomechs walked in circles, Harvesters drifted aimlessly through the sky. Entire formations of warrior forms collapsed where they stood. They're dying, she realized, but slowly, the Queen's ship coordinated their higher brain functions. But they retain enough autonomy to survive for, I'd estimate, maybe 72 hours before complete neural collapse. 72 hours? Park's voice cracked. There are still human survivors down there. Isolated pockets. Underground bunkers. People hiding in the ruins. If those things are still active. Thorne understood. A dying NexHFY was potentially more dangerous than a living one, all the killing instinct with none of the strategic thinking that might show mercy or restraint. For the next 3 days, Haven's rest would be a charnel house as alien predators worked through their death throes. We have to evacuate them, Park said. Everyone's still alive down there. With what? Thorne gestured at the tactical display, showing their available resources. We have 43 shuttles, most of them damaged from the evacuation runs. The NexHFY may be dying, but their anti-aircraft systems are still online. We'd lose half our pilots just getting to the surface, then we go ourselves. The voice came from the hatchway behind them. Colonel Elena Vasquez stepped into the observation deck, her power armor scarred from weeks of ground combat. The Marine commander had been aboard the Sanctuary for medical treatment. A biomechanical parasite had burrowed into her left shoulder during the defense of Firebase. Gamma, but she moved with the careful precision of someone fighting through pain and medication. Colonel, you're supposed to be in the medical bay, Park said. Medical bay's full of people who need it more than I do. Vasquez moved to the tactical display, her augmented reality visor casting readouts across her field of vision. I've been monitoring ground communications. We've got maybe 2,000 people still alive in scattered groups across the northern continent. Most of them are in the old mining tunnels beneath New Geneva. The tunnels are 20 kilometers from the nearest landing zone, Thorne pointed out. Through territory crawling with dying NexHFY, that we fight our way through. Park shook his head. Colonel, I can't authorize a ground operation with our current resources. We barely have enough ships to— You're not authorizing anything, Vasquez interrupted. I am. Emergency battlefield promotion under Colonial Military Code, Section 77. In the absence of higher command authority and with civilian lives at immediate risk, senior field commanders are authorized to take whatever action necessary to preserve human life. Thorne had never seen the regulation invoked before, but she'd heard stories. It was a relic from the early colonial period, when communication delays meant frontier commanders might go months without contact with Earth. In practice, it gave military officers almost unlimited authority in crisis situations. How many volunteers do you think you can get? Park asked quietly. All of them, Vasquez replied without hesitation. Marines, Navy crew, civilian militia, combat engineers, anyone who can hold a weapon and walk in a straight line. We're not leaving our people to die alone in the dark. The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was audacious in its simplicity. The Sanctuary would move into low orbit and deploy every available shuttle simultaneously, overwhelming the NexHFY's dying but still functional air defenses through sheer numbers. Ground teams would establish a perimeter around the mining tunnels, while combat engineers worked to blast through the cave-ins that had trapped the survivors. The risks were enormous. Intelligence estimated at least 10,000 NexHFY bioforms still active in the target area, all of them operating without the strategic restraint that had previously limited their aggression. Worse, the creatures were adapting to their neural degradation, learning to function despite the loss of queenship coordination. One more thing, Dr. Thorne said as the briefing concluded. I've been analyzing biosamples from the dead NexHFY. Their cellular structure is breaking down, but the process is releasing some kind of airborne pathogen. Nothing immediately dangerous to humans, but prolonged exposure could cause— She paused, choosing her words carefully— psychological effects, hallucinations, paranoia, violent episodes. Colonel Vasquez nodded grimly. How long do we have? Full hazmat protocols should give you 12 hours of safe exposure. After that, Thorne shrugged. We're in uncharted territory. The first shuttles launched at 2,300 hours, streaking through Haven's rest atmosphere like falling stars. The NexHFY's dying air defenses responded with instinctive fury biomechanical turrets, tracking the incoming craft with predatory precision, spitting streams of corrosive plasma that lit up the night sky. 3 shuttles died in the first wave, their crews vaporized in the span of heartbeats. But the remaining 40 kept coming. their pilots pushing damaged engines beyond safe limits as they dove toward the landing zones. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, flying the lead shuttle Defiance Memory, watched his starboard engine tear itself apart as he fought to maintain altitude. Bravo team, this is Webb. I'm going down hot. Clear the LZ and prepare for emergency landing. The shuttle hit the ground hard, skidding across broken pavement before coming to rest against the skeletal remains of what had once been a shopping complex. Webb kicked open the emergency hatch and rolled out, his assault rifle already in his hands. Around him, the rest of Bravo Team 9 Marines and combat engineers deployed with the fluid efficiency of soldiers who learned that hesitation meant death. The next Harry came at them within minutes. They moved like broken marionettes, their biomechanical limbs jerking in spasmodic patterns as dying neural networks fought to maintain coordination. But they were still deadly razor-sharp claws that could punch through combat armor, mandibles that dripped with acidic venom, compound eyes that tracked movement with predatory focus. Webb's first shot took the lead warrior form center mass, the depleted uranium round punching through its organic carapace in a spray of luminescent ichor. The creature staggered but kept coming, its damaged nervous system unable to process the concept of retreat. His second shot removed its head entirely. Contact. Left. Marine Corporal Kim Santos called out, her heavy machine gun chattering as she swept the approach to their position. Multiple hostiles moving in from the ruins. The battle for the landing zone lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, Bravo Team had lost 2 Marines and 1 engineer, but they'd established a foothold in the heart of Next Harry territory. Similar scenes played out across the northern continent as human forces carved out defensive positions with bullets and blood. Colonel Vasquez touched down with the final wave, her powered armor servos whining as she bounded from the shuttle's ramp. The air around her was thick with the smell of ozone and decay, the psychoactive compounds Dr. Thorne had warned about, already beginning to affect unprotected humans. Perimeter status, she asked, her comm system linking her to the scattered team leaders. Alpha Team secure, casualties light. Bravo Team operational, 3 clear. Charlie Team. Static filled the channel for a moment. Charlie Team is combat effective, but reporting hallucinations among the unaugmented personnel. Vasquez checked her chronometer. They'd been on the ground for 43 minutes. The pathogen was working faster than expected. All teams, this is Vasquez. Expedite the mining operation. I want those tunnels open in 6 hours, not 12. Anyone not essential to the dig site, rotate back to the shuttles for decontamination. The mining tunnels beneath New Geneva had been carved from solid rock by automated systems decades ago, when Haven's Rest colonists had discovered rare earth deposits beneath the city. The next Harry orbital bombardment had collapsed most of the entrance shafts, trapping nearly 2,000 civilians in a maze of tunnels that stretched for kilometers. Underground, combat engineer Lieutenant Ray Okoye worked by the light of plasma torches, his team's cutting equipment carving through twisted metal and broken stone with methodical precision. Behind him, the tunnel stretched into darkness, filled with the sound of frightened voices and crying children. How much longer? Vasquez asked, her armor's external speakers carrying over the noise of the excavation. Or through the worst of it, Okoye replied, sweat streaming down his face despite the environmental controls in his suit. Maybe 3 more hours to clear a path wide enough for evacuation. A new sound echoed through the tunnel, the rhythmic clicking of Next Harry mandibles, coming from somewhere in the darkness behind them. The creatures had found another way into the underground complex. Contact rear, someone screamed. They're in the tunnels. The fighting that followed was unlike anything in the human military experience. Confined spaces, limited visibility. The constant threat of cave-ins. It was urban warfare, stripped of every advantage technology could provide. Marines fought with knives and pistols when their rifles proved too unwieldy. Civilians grabbed whatever weapons they could find and threw themselves at alien horrors that should have been beyond human comprehension. 12-year-old Rebecca Chen watched her father die, fighting the next Harry warrior form with nothing but a mining laser and desperate courage. She picked up his weapon and continued firing, her small hands barely able to manage the controls, until Marines arrived to reinforce her position. Dr. Sarah Okafor, the colony's chief medical officer, organized a makeshift field hospital in the deepest part of the tunnel system. She worked without rest, treating both human casualties and the psychological effects of prolonged pathogen exposure. When the hallucinations began affecting her own perception, She continued working by feel alone, her medical training taking over where her senses failed. The breakthrough came at 05 for 7 hours. Lieutenant Okoye's team carved through the final obstacle, opening a passage wide enough for stretchers and evacuation equipment. The first shuttle lifted off 20 minutes later, carrying 53 wounded civilians and the body of Colonel Vasquez. She died holding a tunnel junction against a swarm of NextHFY bioforms, her powered armor's ammunition exhausted, fighting with her bare hands until the aliens overwhelmed her position. Her final transmission was a simple acknowledgement. Path is clear. Get them out. By dawn, the evacuation was complete. 2,000 civilians had been pulled from the tunnels beneath New Geneva, along with the bodies of 4 to 7 Marines and 11 combat engineers who died getting them out. The cost was horrific, but the alternative, leaving them to die alone in the dark, had been unthinkable. As the last shuttle cleared Heaven's Rest atmosphere, Dr. Thorne watched the planet fall away beneath them. The NextHFY bioforms were still moving, but their movements were increasingly erratic, increasingly desperate. Within hours, they would be still forever. Humanity had survived its first interstellar war. The question now was whether they could survive the peace that followed. 6 months after the Battle of Heaven's Rest, Admiral Helena Voss stood in the memorial garden aboard the rebuilt New Geneva station, reading names carved into black granite. The list seemed endless. Thousands of men and women who died during humanity's first interstellar war, their sacrifice ensuring that their species would survive to claim the stars. Commander Evelyn Korath, she read aloud, her finger tracing the letters. Colonel Elena Vasquez, Captain Marcus Singh, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb. Each name represented a story, a life cut short in humanity's darkest hour. Admiral Dr. Amara Thorne approached through the garden's carefully maintained pathways, her appearance much improved from the haggard scientist who'd survived the NextHFY siege. 6 months of recovery time had restored her health, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything she'd witnessed. Doctor, any word from the deep space surveys? Thorne nodded, consulting the datapad in her hands. The Pathfinder completed its reconnaissance of the former NextHFY territories last week. 17 star systems, 43 worlds, all of them dead. No bioforms, no technology, no trace that one of the galaxy's dominant species ever existed. When the Queen ship died, it took their entire civilization with it. Voss considered this. The complete extinction of an intelligent species should have felt like victory, but it left her with an uncomfortable hollowness. The NextHFY had been monsters. True enough, a plague of biological conquest that had consumed dozens of civilizations, but they had also been the galaxy's apex predators for over a century, and their sudden absence had created a power vacuum that other species were already moving to fill. What about the Altarian Collective? They formally requested protection. Under the Human Defense Accords, Thorne replied, apparently, our reputation for excessive violence in defense of allies has spread throughout the local galactic community. 3 other species have made similar requests in the past month. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Humanity had been the newcomers just 2 years ago, a single system species taking its first tentative steps into a larger galaxy. Now they were being hailed as the region's dominant military power, the species others turned to when faced with existential threats. There's something else, Thorne continued, her voice carefully neutral. The Colonial Council has approved the NextHFY protocols. Voss felt her stomach tighten. The protocols were humanity's response to the discovery that they weren't alone in the universe and that not all of their neighbors were friendly. Military buildup, aggressive expansion, the development of weapons that made their previous arsenals look like children's toys, the kind of preparations that turned defensive alliances into galactic empires, all of them, every provision, mandatory military service, strategic resource reserves, the establishment of forward operating bases in neutral territory. Thorne paused, and the Biological Warfare Division. That last item was what kept Voss awake at night. Humanity's scientists had learned much from studying NextHFY biotechnology, and they'd applied that knowledge with typical human creativity. The new weapons were elegant, efficient, and utterly horrifying diseases that could be tailored to specific alien physiologies. Biomechanical constructs that made NextHFY war forms look primitive. Viral agents that could sterilize entire worlds. The irony is overwhelming, Voss said quietly. We fought the NextHFY because they were a species of conquerors who absorbed useful technologies from defeated enemies. Now look at us. Through the Memorial Garden's transparent steel dome, she could see the construction yards where humanity's new fleet was taking shape. Dreadnoughts that incorporated next-Harry biotechnology, carriers designed to deploy swarms of semi-intelligent drones, fortress ships that could crack planets from orbit. The United Earth Space Force was building an armada that could challenge gods. There's a difference, Thorne said, though her voice lacked conviction. We're not conquerors. We're defenders, are we? When the Centauri Mining Consortium refused to accept our protection, we blockaded their system until they reconsidered. When the Rigel Commonwealth tried to form an independent defense pact, we sent advisors to help them understand why that was a bad idea. How long before we start deciding which species deserve to exist and which ones don't? A soft chime interrupted their conversation. Admiral Voss's personal communicator was receiving a priority transmission from Earth, a kind of message that couldn't wait for normal diplomatic channels. President Martinez's image materialized above the device, her expression grim. Admiral, we have a situation developing in the Vega system. Long-range sensors had detected an alien fleet massing at the edge of the nebula. At least 200 vessels, configuration unknown. Voss exchanged glances with Dr. Thorne. Species designation unknown. They're not responding to communication attempts, and their technology doesn't match any known signatures. Intelligence estimates they'll reach the Vega colonies within 48 hours. Another threat. Another species that might view humanity as an obstacle to be removed or a resource to be exploited. Voss thought of the memorial garden around her, of all the names carved into black granite, of the children who'd grown up without parents because their species had encountered something that wanted them dead. What are your orders, Madam President? Martinez's smile was cold as winter's starlight. You know the protocols, Admiral. We don't wait for threats to reach our door anymore. We meet them in the dark between stars, and we make sure they understand why that was a mistake. The transmission ended, leaving Voss alone with her thoughts and the weight of command around her. The memorial garden stood in silent testimony to the cost of survival in a hostile galaxy. But beyond the dome, the construction yards hummed with activity as humanity prepared for its next war. They learned the lesson the next-Harry had taught them, learned it well. In a universe where peaceful species became extinct and aggressive ones inherited the stars, there was only one choice that mattered. Humanity would inherit the stars. Voss touched her calm badge. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Voss. Execute. Fleet Mobilization Protocol 7. We have a new species to introduce to human diplomacy. She walked through the memorial garden one last time, reading names and remembering faces. Commander Korath, who died ramming an alien dreadnought. Colonel Vasquez, who'd given her life to save civilians she'd never met. Captain Singh, who'd held the line until the last possible moment. They died so humanity could survive. Now it was up to the living to ensure that survival meant something more than simple existence. The stars were vast and full of wonders, but they were also full of dangers that could end human civilization in the span of a heartbeat. The galaxy was Darwinian in its brutality. Species that couldn't adapt died. Species that couldn't fight were enslaved. Species that couldn't inspire fear were forgotten. Humanity had learned to inspire fear. As the fleet prepared for another war, Admiral Helena Voss stood among the graves of heroes and wondered if they were becoming the monster as they'd once fought against. But in a universe where mercy was weakness and compassion was fatal, perhaps being a monster was the only way to protect the things worth saving. The next-Harry had brought war to humanity's door and learned the cost of that mistake. Now it was time for the next species to learn the same lesson. In the cold equations of galactic survival, there were only two kinds of civilizations, those that made others afraid and those that were already extinct. Humanity had made their choice.